Good evening, folks. This is Brian Lawrence with IndianPeaksWeather.net. We're located here in Nederland, Colorado, at about 8,200 feet in the Front Range foothills, about 9 miles to the west of Boulder, and about 5 miles, 6 miles to the east of the Peak-to-Peak Highway, and a little bit further east of the Continental Divide. And it's a chilly evening here. Here is the Weather Underground map of temperatures across our region, and we're about right in here. And here's Nederland, 26 degrees. And down the plains, notice temperatures are just a little bit warmer in general, depending on where you are. Upper 20s to low to mid 30s, so it's definitely a lot cooler than it has been over the past few weeks, actually. We do have a cold front that came through the area last night, and a reinforcing shot of some cooler air today. So we're back down to more winter-like, or I should say late February-like temperatures for our area. And this is refreshing. I did get out and do some Nordic skiing today over here in Fraser at Devil's Thumb Ranch, and it was a little warm. I think we got into the mid-30s today. Definitely red, silver, kick wax, but overall it's still just great to be outdoors in the Rockies surrounded by the mountains. It was a gorgeous day, lots of sunshine. Notice too, there's not much in the way of wind, and holy cow, have we had winds the past few weeks. We've had some pretty damaging winds. As you know, in this area, it's not uncommon to get winds coming over the Continental Divide, the Continental Divide being right up through here, of hurricane force or greater, even up to 90 miles per hour sometimes. And that can uproot trees, it can damage roofs on houses, and so forth and so on. But tonight, completely different story. It's calm. It's very calm right now, and we are enjoying it. It's quiet, and the house is not shaking in the winds. So it's cool. And there's not much on radar right now either. There are a few echoes here. There are some clouds over the divide, and I think this might be some Virgo coming out of those clouds, but nothing really reaching the ground right now. Taking a look at my weather station, and again we're about 4 miles to the east of Nederland, Colorado, but about the same altitude, elevation, 23 degrees. We had a low this morning of 15 degrees and a high today of about 35 degrees. So again, pretty seasonable for us for this time of year, and we're rounding the corner, getting into spring, getting into early March, which is meteorological spring. Astronomical spring starts around March 20th, 21st. And we'll start to see some warmer days even up here as we get into March. But March and April and May, early May, can bring some of our biggest snows of the year up here in the mountains. So we will just have to wait and see what happens. So 23 degrees, again, winds are variable right now. A few gusts up to 3 miles per hour, big difference from what we've been seeing. No precipitation today to speak of. Dew point 15 degrees right now. Right now the humidity is at 69% outside. That's relatively humid for us. This is a pretty dry climate, especially in the winter. We're not complaining about any of this though. And you can see some of my neighboring stations here, 24 degrees, 24, 23. So we're all in the same ballpark in terms of temperature, which we should be, given that we're so close together. So what's going on in our forecast right now? Well, actually, the forecast will become quite interesting for us over the next 24 to 36 hours. And I'm just going to launch my pen here so I can actually draw on some of these weather maps. And we'll get right into the model guidance, because we have one more day of seasonable temperatures and dry conditions, mostly dry anyway, tomorrow, Monday. And then we have a brief upslope storm, but, you know, it looks like a lot of things are coming together to produce a modest amount of snow here along the Continental Divide, and we'll take every bit of snow we can get right now. Again, it's been a dry couple of weeks after our Groundhog's Day storm, which left us with 2 feet of snow. A lot of that's gone because of the mild temperatures. We're going to have a refresher coming up here for our snowpack. All right, so I'm going to focus on the 18Z GFS for the maps. And we're going to look at a different level of the atmosphere tonight. Ignore that too. Hopefully you can see this. So, starting about midday tomorrow, what we're looking at here is the 700 millibar map. This is a really good map to look at in the Rockies because 700 millibars is equivalent to about 82, I'd say actually 9,000, 9,500 feet. It's a little bit higher than Denver and the plains, but it's about the right altitude for the Continental Divide. And the idea here is the wind flow patterns and the moisture patterns we're looking at are reflective of the winds in the foothills and along the Front Range here. And what we're looking for always, our ingredients for snow here in Nederland generally are one, winds from the east or winds with an easterly component. So northeasterly winds, easterly winds, sometimes northerly winds, but a lot of times northeast, east, and even a little bit south of east. So we're looking for winds coming from the east or with an easterly component through a relatively deep layer of the atmosphere. That's important. That's key because that's upslope. And when we get downslope winds from the other way, from the west, it just dries things out and inhibits precipitation. But easterly winds, you get cooling, you get condensation, you get snow formation, and if the conditions are just right and you hit that dendritic growth, that snowflake growth sweet spot, you can get a nice snowfall for a given amount of liquid water. So this map is about 9,000 feet above mean sea level, about 4,000 feet, 3,500, 4,000 feet above the eastern plains, and it's just a little bit above us here in Nederland. And looking at this tomorrow, we're right about here, where my arrow is, my cursor, I hope you can see that. We're right about here, and again, this is around lunchtime on Monday, and the green is moisture. The darker the green, the more moisture there is. Not precipitation, it's moisture in the atmosphere. Important distinction. The little red dashed lines are what we call lift, quasi-geostrophic lift. It's a big word. Just remember that red means rising air, generally. Rising motion, these red dashed lines. And that's important because if you have rising air with moisture, you get condensation, you get snow formation, and if it's warm, that snow melts into rain. But you get precipitation, and that's the point. That's what we're looking for here, and we're looking for the winds from the east. And at about this time tomorrow, we have a trough here at 700 millibars. And sometimes you don't have to look that high up in the atmosphere to see these troughs. See it right there? That's the trough axis, roughly. And you can see it kind of sagging into northern New Mexico, maybe back towards the Four Corners region a little bit. So what happens from there? And that's the key, is to watch the evolution of this feature. We got a big ridge along the west coast. Now, I should point out that this is a scenario that can produce snow for us. And ridges generally, this is the ridge axis here. Oops, I didn't want to do that. This is the ridge axis right here. Generally, under a ridge, it's warm and dry. Remember, warm air under ridges, storm track rides up and over the ridge. But look where we are. We're not under the ridge here. And so storm systems or upper level energy ride up and over this ridge and then dive down into us. We can actually get some snow from these storm systems coming in from the northwest. If they're strong enough and they can induce an upslope flow along the eastern plains up into the foothills here, and if there's moisture available out here in the plains to be pulled into the system, we can actually get snow. Even though the storm system itself is not a classic Four Corners low tracking up through here. Just an important thing to keep in mind as we look through this. Alright, so we're going to skip ahead now. Let's go a few frames forward into Monday evening. And this will be about 5 p.m. on Monday, and look what's happened. This is actually pretty neat. We have a really distinct trough now that has dug out into the northeast corner of New Mexico, and again we're right about here. See that right there? That's right about where we are, roughly. It's about the Continental Divide and the north central mountains. Important thing to note is that the trough is low pressure, so air is flowing into it like this and then coming out and out like this. See that? What that means is that this air coming in through over us has a northeasterly component. Upslope. Big word around here when it comes to precipitation, any kind of precipitation. And there's moisture. We have 90%, this dark green, relative humidity. That's 700 millibars. Again, that's roughly our altitude, so it's going to be moist by about 5 p.m. tomorrow night. And look at the direction of the wind here. These wind barbs are hard to see, but again, you can see the wind barbs are coming in from the northeast. Awesome, right? And lots of red dashed lines. Some of this is probably model response to the upslope flow against the front range, the air getting lifted by the front range foothills. But there's also some quasi-geostrophic uplift as well, lift being caused by the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, or divergence in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. Fancy words. Important thing to remember is lift. Lift brings precipitation. All right, so that's pretty cool, Brian, right? So we're just going to move right along here now. Let's go into, say 11 p.m. Monday night. This trough here has become pronounced. It's actually closed off just over northeastern New Mexico, almost into the panhandle of Texas. The thing to note about this is that, you know, a lot of the decent storms that we get that affect the Denver area and us as well are these lows that kind of move this way, right? Cut off lows in the mid upper levels of the atmosphere. Well, this achieves almost the same thing, but it evolved in a different way. So you have the low here. You see that little circle there. And again, remember, in the northern hemisphere, this should be a mantra. Wind flows counterclockwise around lows. Pretty basic, but it's good to always repeat ourselves here a little bit. So the wind is going around like this, right? And that means us here in Nederland, right there. Now that's a little bit off, but we're getting an easterly component to those winds. Lots of moisture. Check out the amount of moisture there is now throughout the eastern two-thirds of Colorado. Doesn't mean it's precipitating everywhere, but where these red lines are, where the lift is, where the easterly winds are encountering the foothills or getting lift, we'll be getting precipitation up to the Continental Divide, perhaps even a little bit over it to towns like Winter Park and the ski resort, which is close to the Continental Divide there. Pretty cool. So watch how this evolves over the next 3 hours. This will take us into early morning on Tuesday. There's our low. A little bit to our south. A little bit further south than perhaps we'd like to see it. But again, important thing to note is that we are still in a northeasterly wind flow here at 700 millibars. And it's pretty deep too. We'll take a look at the sounding in a minute. And this low is deepening. And there's plenty of moisture for it to work with. And then finally, we'll get into Tuesday morning. And there you go. Tuesday morning, low is starting to push off to the east a little bit, but we're still in the northeasterly component with some lift. These red lines here. Plenty of moisture still over us. So what we're looking at is basically a decent period of upslope forced snows here in the foothills of northeastern Colorado, and basically all the way down even to the Palmer Divide and maybe even down towards the foothills outside of Colorado Springs. But it's really ideal for us here with the winds coming in from the northeast, the moisture and the lift. And we're looking at a period of snow starting roughly from probably about late Monday afternoon into Tuesday morning. I'd say that the brunt of it will be between about 6 p.m. Monday evening to about 7 or 8 a.m. Monday morning. About 12 hours of precipitation. Not really heavy at any point, but what I'm wondering about is how efficient the snowfall process is going to be. And for that, we're going to switch to another view here. We're going to go to the SKU-T diagram. You're going to be like, what the heck is this, Brian? Well, let me tell you what it is. All right? Go back up here, and we're going to, this is the NAM now. We're looking at the NAM. This is the 0Z NAM, so it's relatively recent. And it's still looking promising for us. If you go to the initialization, oops, this is the 0 hour. When the balloons are launched by the Weather Service at 0Z and 12Z every day, that translates to a balloon launch in Denver at 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. What you're looking at here is at one point in Denver, how the temperature, the solid line, and the dew point, the dashed line, vary with altitude. Denver's high to begin with, right? About a mile high. There you go, the mile high city. And so the pressure there is about 850 millibars, and that's where this temperature line begins. And as we go up, you can see the heights here, 5,000, 10,000, 14,000, all the way up to 53,000 feet. This is how the temperature varied as that balloon was launched. eventually, I mean, the temperatures are these solid lines here. 0, -5. So it's a skew T diagram. The reason why it's called a skew T diagram is because these temperature lines are skewed. The solid lines here, black lines, are temperature in Celsius. 0 degrees Celsius, -5, -15, -20. And you can see how the temperature, as the blue went up, the blue line here, gradually decreased almost to -50 degrees Celsius before hitting the tropopause at about 35,000 feet. And from there on up, the temperature was more isothermal, fancy weather term for constant temperature. Not too exceptional with the dew point curve. Atmosphere is relatively dry this evening. As I said, it's pretty clear, right? A little bit of upslope flow here, and you can see that we did have a cold front come through today. So this little chink in this temperature line is the top of that cold front, or the layer of cold air that slid down on the plains to the east of the foothills today, and it's right about 10,000 feet. All right. And right now the winds are generally from the west, just a little bit of easterly flow close to the surface. Now this diagram is critical when it comes to figuring out how efficient upslope is going to be here in the foothills of Colorado. And granted, this plot is over Denver. It's hard to generate one right over us here in the foothills, but I think it'll suffice to give us an idea of the moisture and wind patterns that will be affecting us over the next 36 hours. All right, so we're going to jump ahead in time here. This is now, basically. We're going to go to 18 hours, midday tomorrow, which is what we were looking at earlier. Midday Monday, 18Z Monday. Again, not very exceptional, nothing too exciting. A little bit, the dew point line gets pretty close to the temperature line here in the upper levels of the atmosphere, above 14,000 feet. That indicates some high cloudiness, more than likely. So we'll have some high clouds around tomorrow. I think we already have some high cloudiness around now. But overall, the winds are generally from the west, northwest still. No upslope flow. So we're still drying here on the front range. I wouldn't expect any precipitation through midday Monday, midday tomorrow. But things change pretty quickly. 21 hours. Atmosphere starts to really moisten up, and you're like, okay, how can you tell the atmosphere is moistening up from this? Well, it's this here. It's the fact that the dew point line is getting closer to the temperature line. And when they get closer together, the dew point depression, which is the temperature minus dew point, becomes smaller. It makes sense. You're just looking at a graphical representation of that. So you can think of this as moisture in the atmosphere, and it's pretty moist. Look at that. From about here to here, it's a deep level layer of the atmosphere, almost all the way up to the tropopause. There's a lot of moisture up there. A lot of that's the Pacific moisture coming up and over the ridge we're looking at into our area. All right. And then finally, we get into Monday evening. Again, this is about 5 p.m. Look at this. The dew point temperature line, they're almost on top of each other. The atmosphere is almost saturated through a deep layer from about 700 millibars, or 10,000 feet, up to at least 24,000 feet. So there's lots of moisture. And the winds here are starting to veer around to the northeast in the surface. Now the hodograph is a way of looking at these winds and how strong they are as you go up in the atmosphere. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are kilometers in height above ground level. So 1 kilometer above ground level in Denver, 2 kilometers above ground level in Denver, 3 kilometers above ground level in Denver, and so forth. 1 kilometer above ground level in Denver is roughly our altitude here in Nederland, Colorado. Maybe a little bit below us, but it's a good benchmark. All right, and still in the hodograph, what you're looking at is wind direction as you go up in altitude. So right here, 1 kilometer winds are coming in from about north-northeast. Got it? 2 kilometers winds are coming from the north-northwest at about 10 knots. And these concentric circles are wind speeds. 20 knots, 40 knots, 60 knots, 80 knots, 90 knots, or 100 knots. I'm not sure. 3 kilometers, northwest winds at about 20 knots. So generally not upslope winds yet, right? I mean, as we go up, they're still coming from the north-northwest. But you can see some evidence here that they're starting to back around to the northeast. Pretty cool, huh? When we get tomorrow night, here goes the fun stuff. Pretty deep layer of upslope wind flow develops as colder air begins to sink down into northeastern Colorado. Colder air, relatively colder air. So right here at 850 millibars to about 650 millibars, we have upslope flow. You can see that on the HODO graph here. 1 kilometer, winds are coming in from the northeast now. It's about our altitude. And even up to 2 kilometers, winds have a pretty good easterly component. So they're starting to strengthen. The key is they're starting to strengthen from the northeast now. That's upslope flow for us, and the atmosphere is saturated. Important things to note here. Down in Denver, still some dryness in the lower parts of the atmosphere. We're about here in Nederland at 750 millibars, 8,200 feet. 8,200 feet is right about here. And Denver is above freezing, but we are at about -5 degrees. So that would put us down to about 28 degrees, 27 degrees. Cold enough for snow for sure. Denver probably starting off as a mix. And we expect precipitation to be a little bit lighter there too, because a lot of the forcing will be over the foothills. But definitely warmer on the plains. A lot of times here in Nederland, our better snowfalls, especially along the peak-to-peak highway up to the Continental Divide, occur when it's not too cold on the plains. Because what happens is if you get a lot of cold air on the plains, air becomes very stable on the plains, 1. 2, the more efficient snowfall processes occur further down to our east, down towards the plains and Boulder, along the Flatirons, even down in Denver. This is going to be a warmer event. But the dendritic growth area is still about -15 degrees Celsius, is still saturated. So I suspect there's going to be some good snowfall growth, and it's definitely going to be cold enough here and above here to result in some, I think, efficient snowfall processes. Definitely not grapple. It's not very convective. The atmosphere is not very unstable, but I guess we'll wait and see. And a lot of times that's the biggest concern here is, what is our snowfall ratio? I mean, you've all heard that 1 inch of liquid produces 10 inches of snow. That's just on average. A lot of times in the middle of winter, here in Nederland, we have snowfalls of 1 inch of liquid producing 20 inches of snow. That's a 1 to 20 ratio. The reason you get those big ratios is because the snow is very fluffy, has a lot of air. It's very dendritically, it grows very dendritically well. And so when you have these fluffy snowfalls, these high snowfall ratios, the snow has a lot of air in it. If it's warmer, the snow forms in a different way. There's less air in it, and the snow's heavier. And if it's too cold, you get the same thing. If it's too cold, you don't get the nice flake production, and you get a lot more plates and pillars, especially pillars, which again don't have much air when they fall and accumulate, so you don't have the very high snowfall ratios. But I think we're in pretty good shape for at least a 1 to 12 to 1 to 15 inch event tomorrow night. Okay, and we'll take a look at some precip totals as we work through this. This is Monday night around 11 p.m. Decent upslope flow. Look at this, almost up to 20 knots at 1 kilometer, maybe a little bit above 1 kilometer. Northeasterly winds all the way up to about the top of Long's Peak, definitely flowing over the Continental Divide. Not a problem for us. 33 hours, same thing. Atmosphere is still quite wet. In fact, if we compare it to, if you look at it there, the atmosphere has a lot of moisture in it still. Quite saturated through the dendritic growth area. Looking good. Cooling off on the plains. Denver finally seeing some snow here. Winds over 20 knots now from northeast over us in the Front Range foothills. Good upslope flow again up to the top of the Continental Divide, top of Long's Peak. And then by Tuesday morning, looks pretty good. Holy cow, look at this. Winds up to 30 knots from the northeast. You can see them here at about the level of Nederland. So it's going to be breezy on Tuesday morning. Atmosphere drying out a little bit in the top there, but still plenty of moisture above us to support the, I think, efficient growth of snowfall. And then as we get into Tuesday morning, winds slowly start to back around to the north as we go through the day. And that'll gradually result in the end of the snowfall, and you can see the atmosphere starts to dry out pretty significantly by midday Tuesday, lunchtime Tuesday. So as I said, 5 p.m. Monday, 7 or 8 a.m. Tuesday, probably the best period of snowfall here. And as for totals, we'll go back to our models and we'll just take a look at the GFS total for this particular storm system. And you will notice that when we do that, that the heaviest precipitation amounts are right along the continental divide. Not too surprising, actually. And it's hard to do this, but we are right about in here, right about Nederland, Colorado. If you look at a map, we are just about in the middle of the state between the western border and the eastern border. That puts us right about in there. So between a 1/4 inch, closer to a 1/2 inch of liquid, probably. A few places picking up 3/4 of an inch of liquid. If we look at the NAM is actually a little bit drier on the plains, but has a similar pattern. A lot of the precip right over us here along the continental divide. 1/2 inch liquid, maybe a little bit more. And if we get a 1 to 15 inch snow ratio, a 1/2 inch of liquid, 6/10 of an inch of liquid would result in anywhere between 7 to 10 inches of snow, probably. So this has potential to at least give us a decent snowfall, replenish the fact that most of our snow is melted here because it's been so warm. And it's really going to focus, I think, on the foothills and the continental divide. I think that's going to be the big focus this time. This is a really good setup for the foothills and upslope flow, relatively warm temperatures on the plains, and lots of moisture. And some lift in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, that QG lift. So it's looking exciting. And we'll see what happens. I'm going to call right now before 6 to 10 inches of snow in Nederland. A little bit more up towards Eldora, probably. We'll see how that pans out. And temperatures tomorrow night gradually cooling to about 20-22 degrees by Tuesday morning. And then we'll have a day on Tuesday where it's going to feel like winter for a change again. This is Brian signing off. I'll try to do an update tomorrow night, Monday night, if I have time. But enjoy the snow and keep looking at the sky. Thank you for joining me.